All right. Good morning, good afternoon, whenever you're watching this video. My name is Madison Walker, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about donor cow nutrition. So you may be wondering, what is the importance of this topic, or what do producers need to concern themselves with donor cow nutrition? We know that assistive reproductive technologies are the greatest tool available to producers to help rapidly improve the genetics of our herd, whether that be AI, embryo transfer via conventional flush or IVF. We can use some of these technologies to really magnify the effect of our highest performing cattle, those with the best numbers and the best performance, and multiply their offspring much more quickly than many natural alternatives. So even though the number of donor cows we may have as commercial producers may be 0 or 1, or even as purebreds, the number of donor cows are much smaller than our number of recips or just general cows that we're doing AI on. The nutrition of those cows is significantly more important than your average cow because she is going to have a greater impact on your herd genetics in the long run. So some of the most important things to consider when thinking about donor cow nutrition are, your common nutrition things. What is her body condition score? What is her stage of production? We want to make sure that she's around a 5, which is average body condition score. And that means that we need to make sure we understand what her energy needs are for that stage in production. So her energy needs are much different as an early lactation cow that we're trying to get bred back versus a dry cow that weaned a calf 3 or 4 months ago. So like we said, body condition 5 is ideal, and there are detrimental effects to oocyte development when we over condition or under condition our cattle. And as you probably expect, over conditioning is the biggest issue we see with donor cows, where people bring them up in a barn and they treat them real special because they are their best animals and they tend to perform better than their average animals. So if they're feeding as a herd, they're going to gain a little more than the herd average. And those cows come in overly fat. It makes it difficult for the technician to get in there and feel what they need to feel to perform a flush efficiently. But also it has been shown to induce a hyperglycemic state, kind of affects the levels of insulin and insulin-like growth factor and decreases the recruitment of viable oocytes. Higher insulin levels have also been correlated with lower response to FSH. So the issue with that is that if you send a cow to be flushed and she's too fat, she may not respond to the FSH as well as she should. Therefore, the technician will probably increase the dose of FSH. And we know there's a pretty big danger, especially in young animals, of dosing them too high with FSH in some of those super ovulation protocols, and it results in kind of blowing them out, and they're not able to cycle normally after that and even get bred to AI or natural service because of this. And that's a waste of a good animal, and we want to avoid that. So in negative energy balance right there at calving, we want to make sure we're feeding enough, but not so much that she gets overly fat. And we just want to monitor the conditions of those cows throughout different stages of production and try to keep them at body condition score of 5. Kind of the next thing that we need to concern ourselves with are lipids, which is pretty difficult for cattle producers to get their head around because usually we don't concern ourselves with the type of fats in the diet or really even the amount of fat. Ruminants kind of have the miraculous ability to, form their own fats and biohydrogenate pretty much anything we feed them and provide themselves with the fatty acids they need to survive. However, fatty acids are pretty essential when it comes to oocyte development. The oocyte uses it for about 35% of energy sources, but it's also very, very important when it comes to preservation. So if you're going to flush a cow and freeze those embryos, not transfer them fresh, the fatty acid composition of the diet affects fatty acid composition there in the ovary, and depending on how the uterus secretes different fatty acids, the oocyte will be more resilient or less resilient to cryopreservation. So in general, 18 carbon unsaturated fatty acids improve embryo development and cryopreservation ability. But the issue again is with the biohydrogenation that happens in the rumen. So, rumen protected fats are pretty hard to feed, so they're pretty expensive. But when it comes down to one cow, maybe 2 cows on a small herd that doesn't have many donors, it may be worth the investment to improve the preservation ability of those embryos. This tends to be the biggest problem in the summertime, where it's hotter and those cows, there's more forage available, but they spend less time eating and they leave that forage in their rumen for longer to cycle, which increases the amount of time the microbes have to biohydrogenate those fats and decreases the amount of unsaturated fats that are reaching the bloodstream to be distributed throughout the various organ systems of the body. So this is another reason to kind of try to avoid flushing cows in the summertime, in addition to heat stress and a couple other factors. The number of embryos, the growth of those embryos, and the resilience of those embryos is going to be decreased in the summertime. Next is protein. Much like fats, the rumen microbes can take pretty much any nitrogen source and they can form their own amino acids that they need for growth and development. Basically, the biggest thing here with feeding donor cows is their protein requirement is probably not as high as you think it is. And overfeeding protein can result in excess urea or ammonia production. And it's been shown in vitro that urea and ammonia are both negative to oocyte growth and development. And so, especially if we're doing IVF, we want to kind of keep that urea concentration down in the bloodstream, keep the ammonia concentration down, just to help those oocytes develop a little further before we aspirate them and try to grow them in vitro. Finally, it's pretty common sense, but you want to monitor any toxins that your cows may come across in a diet. So gossypol is pretty common in cottonseed, and the effects on sires have been pretty well demonstrated, and the effects on cows are, give or take, there's a certain amount of gossypol that cows can tolerate and not show negative impacts on reproduction. But again, when it comes to formulating a ration for one or two special cows that are really going to impact your herd, it's worth it to just take the cottonseed out and not risk it, because it's probably going to affect at least the number of oocytes that are recruited in a superovulation protocol. And there's no sense in that when it's not that much more expensive to feed a little nicer ration to those special cows. So last couple of tips are: work with your extension agent, use some recommendations from the NRC, and kind of develop a ration that meets the needs of that donor while not pushing her too hard and getting her too fat. And also just be conscious of what season you're gonna think about trying to flush her or try to get her aspirated, and just be mindful of what might be in the diet that's potentially having negative impacts on her performance. Thank you.